the farm that he essentially doomed the farmer and his daughter when he went through there with Arya the first time. I'm almost wondering if this conversation with Brienne and knowing that Arya is okay is a bit of a catharsis for him. This ability to say maybe he had been silently worried that he was leading her down the wrong path, and the advice that he was giving her and the way that the Hound was teaching her how to survive wasn't the right way, and to learn that she's thriving, not just surviving but thriving, is a big moment for the Hound. So I don't want to spend too much time on that one scene, but for me that was a really cool, one of my favorite scenes of this episode.
I dig it.
Well, the other meetup we get is Pod and Tyrion and Bronn together again. And, yeah. And Tyrion, kind of, in my opinion, looks at Pod almost like a son, they all kind of, are really glad to see each other. But again, it's this weird, the whole Lannister, back and forth has been, struggle for everybody. Because, why do we have to meet on such shitty terms overall? But, yeah, we get that meetup. And I don't know if anybody else wants to kind of dive into their reunion.
Sure, I will. I mean, I feel as if what we saw between... And I think to back up just a second and put everything in perspective. So, Brienne and Pod are there from the north. Tyrion is there with Daenerys. And Bronn is there with Cersei and Jaime. So, they're kind of all on different sides, but what we know as watchers at this point is that, so the north and Daenerys are not so much on different sides, so it's not quite equal ground that everybody's meeting on at this point. It makes sense that Tyrion and Pod would be more friendly than Tyrion and Bronn, but I really like how you kind of even had Tyrion's it's nice to see you.
And even
for everybody, honestly. This was the all-staff meeting from, from your...
It's the trio of the Blackwater.
Yeah, pretty much. But it's your all-staff meeting from an international corporation where you're seeing people you all had your first day orientation with who you kind of got along with, but then never saw each other again.
Yeah, and I think even to take that analogy a step further, what I thought was cool was... there are, and even outwardly mentioned by Bronn, the fancy people, and then, sort of the more pawns, right? Mm-hmm. And the pawns being Pod and Bronn, and even Brienne to an extent. The pawns in this episode, outwardly recognize their role as a pawn, to the point where, Bronn is saying, hey, let's just go to drink and let these fancy people talk. Whether he's taken to a brothel or whatever that is, just the fact that they're still friends, even though they're on different sides. They understand that, they know where their bread is buttered, but at the same time, friendship is important to them. And the fact that Brienne can sort of step out of line and shoot Jaime down because of the pre-existing relationship that she has with him. We're just seeing power is a little bit more fluid this episode than it's been in past episodes. And the little guy's got a lot of good punches in.
Yeah, and I always find it interesting.
Mayweather. There you go.
Yeah. The rest are trying to dance. Yeah, I think I always look at it too because it feels like a lot of people have connections to other sides of the war. We've been talking about it a lot. Even Jorah and stuff being from Essos, but having connections to the north, and then people having connections to King's Landing or Dorne, etc. And they're all kind of coming together in this dragon pit, right? So we see Bronn and Pod. Bronn asks him, like you said, you want to go have a drink while we let the fancy people talk? And then the Hound says with Tyrion in kind of this awkward, tense, silent situation where it felt like for a second maybe Cersei had something up her sleeve. I left this shit city because I didn't want to die in it. Am I going to die in this shit city? And he's kind of just asking Tyrion in the moment. And then we get the entrance of Darth Vader and Cersei. And then and the Hound walks straight up to the mountain. And, what does this mean? But he says, what did they do to you, brother? Doesn't matter. You know what's coming for you. You've always known what's coming for you.
That was a really neat interaction to watch, even though it was mostly one-sided because the Mountain doesn't say anything at this point. But it shows the Hound as a very complex character. It's on the one hand, this is still his brother. And to see his brother transformed into this zombie, it really bothered him. You could tell that for just a split second. And then all of a sudden, you're but you're still the guy who shoved my face in the fire, and I'm going to murder you.
Yeah, snaps back. Yeah.
What the hell is coming for him? What am I missing here?
The Hound is coming for him.
That's what we're supposed to take away from this?
Yeah.
That's what I took away from it,
So
too,
he's right there. So he's here for him. So why didn't we see some kind of throwdown?
Because they're both sort of collared dogs right now, in a way, and the Hound maybe maybe less extreme than the Mountain, but like the Mountain's not going to do anything Cersei doesn't tell him to do, and the Hound knows that he is at least like aware enough and with it enough to know that, okay, this conversation has to happen. I've derailed this far enough. Like he's like, I gotta go get the fucking thing, and then he like goes downstairs and he's like, get the fucking thing.
I'll give it to you. Do we feel like the Hound is a match for the Mountain? I mean,
this was the first time I've seen them standing together in a while, and I was like, fuck, he's kind of his own height. Like, this could be like a decent battle. I've always pictured the Hound. That's a great point, Beth. I always pictured the Hound to be like super small comparatively and like dwarfed by the Mountain.
They were eye to eye.
They were like eye to eye in this
And I mean,
moment.
then like split second later,
zombie red
the
eyes.
weird stare.
red eyes. And I mean, split seconds later, we've got him then making that lovely show of strength, carrying the giant box up just like a beast, right?
It.
Yeah, so he brings... Well, right before that happens, and I guess he walks off the scene, we get the entrance of the dragon, and everybody's just wowed by it. And specifically, they key on Jaime and Jon getting out of their seat and saying, like, what the hell is coming in when you hear it screech? And then it comes flying in and landing on the side of the dragon pit. Bam. And then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, she means business. And if I had a dragon, I think that's how I'd make every entrance.
I think you have to make your entrance
Totally
like that.
WWE style, baby. It was like they were
needed
already like in the ring
pyrotechnics.
having the conversation, like Vince McMahon's in the ring talking to somebody else, and all of a sudden it's like, if you smell what the Rock is cooking,
pretty
and
sure
all of a
it's the
sudden the
exact thing we
dragons
did last
fucking
night.
fly in. Yeah, that was awesome.
I honestly wasn't. I was surprised. I was wondering if after the last episode, if she would keep her dragons safe, chained. I mean, we know Cersei's got the spear. I mean, the what did they call it? The
scorpion.
The scorpion, right? I was curious if she was going to be more protective of her dragons now that she's only got 2. So when she came in, like full show of strength, I mean, she's not backing down. No loss is keeping her down. I was really interested that that's the direction she took.
What did we make of the first ever like eye test between Cersei and Daenerys? Like, if we can just talk about the way that they reacted to seeing each other and like kind of look at the subtleties of it. To me, what I saw, and this is like, I think I was talking to Joe about this at work the other day. Like, I think there's a lot that can be read into these scenes that isn't there, and it's kind of like in high school when you're reading like a Hemingway novel, and the teacher asks, "Why do you think they made the truck blue?" And you're like, "Well, maybe he just made the truck blue. I don't know." Like, I mean, that's what we're here to do. We got a podcast, we got mics, and we're going to talk about shit like this. So I'm looking at Cersei and the way that she's watching Daenerys enter. And I did high school theater, guys, so I kind of get actors. You know what I mean? So,
It's like you could have been in the show.
Yeah, pretty much could have been in the show. But like the way that she kind of looked at her was almost, she didn't turn her head to look at Daenerys. She moved her eyes to look at Daenerys, but she stayed regal and like stared straight forward. And as Daenerys entered, like just kind of looked at her. And like as she sat down, like Cersei immediately popped out like we've been here for some time. And then like Daenerys was like, sorry, whatever, like whatever. But it was like that moment where it was like Cersei wasn't going to let her guard down because she was aware of how important that moment was. Just like Daenerys was aware of how important that moment was, and thus rode her fucking dragon into the Colosseum. Right. But Cersei, in my opinion, fired back in her own way by not reacting and being scared of a giant dragon.
I think what's great is that Cersei comes in late to like Tyrion and the gang, and then she's like, you're late. Where you been? And she says, my apologies, but it's like, no one outlates a late entrance by Cersei, but she got that. Like, it was an absolute slap in the face.
It's like a real,
Dany.
yeah.
Like, what's the female equivalent of a dick measuring contest?
The Kardashians.
I don't understand that.
I don't even know that.
But no, like it was, and I think they were testing each other. I think it wasn't even subtle. It was just like very quick little one-liners back and forth, but like nothing was phasing them. They just let it go.
I thought it was very interesting how little the two spoke to each other, despite the fact that was what they were all there to do. And I think Dany almost seemed to be under like strict orders to not speak right throughout that scene. And Tyrion, and I think it was the last episode, even mentioned that like, if we go into this, you need to keep a check on your everything. I mean, we know that Cersei's going to do something to provoke you into doing something irrational and crazy like you do, and you need to not do that. And it very much felt in this scene to me like Dany was like leashed, right? Like she was containing all of her self, because we usually see her, like when she met with John, she's very much the one that's speaking. She's the one that is owning the room. And in this, she was seated, her hands in her lap, and she was staring straight ahead. And that was all she was doing, with a few, my apologies. I mean, she seemed very controlled. And that was very interesting, I think, to see between the two women.
And I wonder if that was her being leashed or her being naked, for lack of a better term. Because I think, like, at the end of last episode, when she saw the threat, like, we saw a different Daenerys, and we talked about this a little bit on last week's show, where it was like, okay, when she's in that boat with John and like holding his hand, like, to me it wasn't that she was holding his hand like let's a bone. It was like holding his hand like, I'm scared. Like, I think we see a scared Daenerys at this point, where she realizes that, like, we could all be doomed, and the reason she's there is because she's scared, and the reason that she's letting Cersei sort of like walk all over her in a way in this meeting is because she understands the main goal is to make an alliance, and she's not going to shit on that right now. And every time that Daenerys could have launched into like a verbal like retort on that, you're right, she checked herself and didn't do it. But I think that's more from a place of understanding what's at stake, because she's literally seen what's at stake, rather than like Tyrion telling her what to do, because we've seen that might not necessarily work.
I completely agree with you. I think I completely agree with you. I think she's giving Tyrion a chance in terms of she's listening to what his advice is, and she's saying, okay, I've seen the threat. I am scared. I will give this a shot to play your way. And I think that that's a big piece of what was keeping her in check throughout that meet. Yeah, for sure.
I think Tyrion even mentions that in his exchange with Cersei, and talking about like, well, why would Cersei sort of questions, you know, why would she pick you as a hand or something? And he's like, well, maybe she's just picking someone that's going to keep her in check. I mean, I'm super paraphrasing. Yeah, instead of feed her impulses, check her impulses. And so, yeah, maybe that, to your point, is exactly what he was doing, and that's why we saw her act the way that she was acting.
So we see like a bit of an interesting con here, because the very first thing that happens is Tyrion walks out and he's going to start like essentially this PowerPoint presentation about how, you know, we kill these White Walkers, or at least that's what I took it to be. But then Euron interrupts him right away and essentially like calls out Theon and tells him that he has Yara and everything. And then everybody tells Euron, like, quit being a little bitch, wasting our time, sit down, let's move on. And
you're new here.
Yeah. We all have much more skin in the game than you do. And then Jon steps up and said, this is about living, which is kind of what Beric put in his ear, right? This is a war of people being able to stay alive. And then Tyrion speaks up on behalf of Cersei's counterpoint of like, well, how can we trust all of this shit that happened with, you know, Dany's father, etc. And he says, no convo will erase the last 50 years. We have something to show you. And the Hound muscles this fucking crate up the stairs like a boss. And then he opens the door, and we were all kind of like,
is it dead?
Yeah, we're like, how did this thing... It was like making this crazy noise when he knocked on it earlier. Is it not in there? I was like, those idiot Lannister guards let it out of the cage.
Yeah, the writers fed that well. The writers were like, they had the one Lannister guard, which the back of my mind I kind of wish was Ed Sheeran, like asking about like what's in the crate, like what's, you know what I mean? Yeah,
what's in the box?
Yeah,
that would have been awesome. So then the Hound kind of like tiptoes around the thing, which I thought was hilarious, like the way he was like playing with it. And then he finally kicks it over, and we see this ferocious thing come like a bat out of hell, which is a right at Cersei, and she kind of looks scared, you know, for the first time. I think she kind of questions it, and what we were talking about a minute ago is everybody who's seen the threat has kind of become scared in some way.
I didn't have anything to add. I was just moving the mic closer to be more comfortable. But no, I no, yeah. And it's kind of interesting, and I know we'll talk about it in just probably a few minutes, but like I think the way that Cersei reacted to it and the way that Jaime reacted to it are very different. Jaime gets up out of his chair, if I'm remembering correctly, and it's like, what do we do now? And Cersei just stands there almost in shock. Granted, it did like come charging at her, and you see this thing that literally wants to eat you. That would probably shock anybody.
Yeah, but you saw her slightly nudged out of her position of strength, but not like Jaime was. You're right, to your point. Like, she was sort of like nudged enough to look scared, and that's a rare thing that we see out of Cersei, especially Cersei post sept bombing. Like, she's been nothing but cold. In control and power and calm. But we saw that moment of her like, what the what the serious fuck is that? Which I'm always so kind of like, you just saw two dragons land for the first time, and like that didn't like freak you out. But yeah.
Anyone surprised that not a single person jumped in